Borderlands 3 changed a lot over the course of its lifetime. The balance of power shifted constantly as existing weapons were buffed or nerfed and new items introduced. Today we'll be following along with that never-ending quest for power as I go over the complete history of the meta in Borderlands 3. Brace yourselves for a hefty hit of nostalgia and the many twists and turns that await. Borderlands 3 graced us with its presence on the 13th of September 2019, when the hunt for the best of the best began. It wouldn't take long for a trifecta of legendary weapons to rise to the top, like the cream from a freshly squeezed cow. And they were joined by a pretty busted grenade mod. One of the weapons was of course the Leuda, a Vladov sniper rifle that no other gun came close to in terms of DPS. Borderlands 3 was difficult when it first came out, but this was a gun that made it a lot easier, firing a single projectile that splits off into 3 after travelling a short distance. Calibrate that distance correctly and your enemies were in for a world of hurt. Up there with the Leuda was the Flakka, your one-stop shop for explosion noise. Where the Leuda would handle bosses, the Flakka had the mobbing field covered, firing numerous invisible projectiles that create a series of explosions. Rounding off the top 3 guns at launch was of course the King's or Queen's Call. These things were designed to be good, they had to be when they were dropped exclusively from the final boss. The elemental Jacob's pistols that on critical hits summon 3 more projectiles that circle round for another hit. This unique effect made them perfect for a fadeaway flak build, but other Vault Hunters could still make great use of them while bossing. At launch, these guns were great, standing head and shoulders above the rest. But they weren't broken. However, one particular grenade mod was, and that's the Porcelain Pipe Bomb. A unique quest reward capable of dealing almost infinite amounts of damage. Wherever this grenade lands, it causes a radioactive puddle to appear on the ground, where a number of child grenades are spawned. However, there was a bug in the code which, if you landed it right, made the grenade incredibly fertile, where the child grenades would never stop spawning. As you may have guessed, this resulted in incredible amounts of damage, and clearly made it the grenade mod of choice. Not many people had the opportunity to play around with PPB, nerfed just under 2 weeks after the game launched, leaving the Hex to hold the crown as best grenade mod in the game. The next day the meta was shook up again, with the King's and Queen's Call receiving a 50% fire rate reduction, which made it topple down the pecking order and only a top 3 weapon for flak. However, at the same time, sniper rifles got an overall buff, which made the Leuda even better. It wouldn't stay better for long though, as on the 17th of October, it was nerf or nothing. They completely shook up the meta. We had to find a whole new one. The Leuda had its critical damage bonus decreased by 30%, and they fixed a bug which caused an extra projectile, essentially decreasing its damage by another 25%. We found out they didn't test the Flakka properly before shipping the game. Its projectiles actually hurt enemies, which was something that they didn't expect, reducing its damage by 33% and making it consume the whole magazine per shot. The Hex grenade mod also got a really big nerf, having its damage reduced dramatically, as well as its duration. Grenade builds were no more, they just weren't. Although the Leuda and Flakka were still good, they were no longer great and highly situational. But it's in these times of great sacrifice where the true hero is born. Emerging through the rubble of the nerf apocalypse was the Cutsman. It knew what it was like to be nerfed, having its damage reduced by 25% on the same day. However, that wasn't enough to keep it down, becoming everyone's go-to weapon in all scenarios. The Cutsman would see us into the next DLC as Mr. Reliable. It carried a spear to your spear. If your soup was too hot, it would blow on it for you. Up until this point, players had been using whatever they could to shield themselves. There wasn't a single shield that was deemed to be better than the rest. However, on the 21st of November, that changed, all thanks to the introduction of the Melee Wand takedown. The melee one takedown was tough. There was no party size scaling, it was true takedown for the solos too. However, one shield was up to the challenge, and that was the Transformer. You see, many of the enemies in Midnight's Ken like to zap you, and there's plenty of barrels around that'll zap you too. However, the Transformer turns shock into shields, which makes it perfect for combating that arena. And it also has that massive bullet absorption rate as an added bonus. It wasn't until the challenges presented by the melee one takedown that the Transformer cemented itself in the meta as the go-to survivability shield. On the 19th of December, a new challenger appeared as part of the Handsome Jackpot DLC, and that was the Ion Cannon. This launcher was so much more powerful than anything else we'd ever seen that it became the go-to weapon for everything. Nothing could come close. It only consumed 1 ammo per shot, so you could clear arenas with it, and of course it had the damage needed to drop bosses. However, on the 16th of January, Gearbox decided that that was too much, increasing its reload time to 5 seconds and made it consume at least 6 ammo per shot, and meant it was only viable for bossing. That left the Cutsman to slide back into the meta to pick up the slack that the Ion Cannon dropped. That duo would last a little over a month when on the 27th of February, one gun received the buff of a lifetime, and that was the Lob. Having its damage increased by over 800%, this gun changed everything. It shifted Borderlands 3's focus on nerfing weapons to buffing them, and that continued right up to the end of its support. With the Ion Cannon tainted by a heavy nerf, the Lob became the damage dealer, with the Cutsman providing great all-round support. On the 5th of March 2020, it would be joined by a couple of buff buddies in the form of the Hellshock and Krakatoa. These two weapons, like the Lob, became completely unrecognizable to the gun of before, able to absolutely annihilate enemies at speeds no player was used to. The game was getting easier, but it wasn't even close to stopping. DLCs provided an opportunity to shake things up, shake up that meta, and on the 26th of March, those hips didn't lie. The Guns, Love and Tentacles DLC provided us with more busted gear, but this time it would stay busted, with the highlighted weapon being of course the Anarchy, a shotgun that can hit with monstrous levels of force. It has a built-in stacking mechanic that causes its weapon to increase in damage by almost 1400%. In theory, reaching max stacks took a while, but there was an exploit at the time where you could just reload cancel or emote to charge it up to full power. If the Lob was a step up, then the Anarchy was a few steps more, becoming the go-to weapon for whatever challenge you faced. Up until this point, there was no standout artifact, but thanks to Claptrap and his exploits, we managed to gain the Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge, an artifact that massively increases your damage simply by you shooting things. It was much better than the original base game artifacts due to its unique effect and the much lower reliance on RNG. The worst Pearl would be better than 95% of base game artifacts, and became a staple in many builds from this day forth. The last change at this point in time to round off the meta that exclusively included items from the second DLC was the Old God, a shield that increased your elemental damage of whatever it was attuned to. It didn't boost your damage by a crazy amount, only 20%, but that damage boost was active all the time, which no other shield could do. It also came with 25% elemental damage resistance, which is a nice bonus. Just under a month later, on April 23rd, we witnessed the first major shakeup in the meta thanks to Revenge of the Cartels, which launched alongside Mayhem 2.0. Gearbox decided to go in a new direction with Borderlands 3's endgame, and they only told a handful of legendaries. If you weren't using the meta at this point in time, you had no shot in combating the challenges of the higher Mayhem levels. This marks the day when the most busted grenade mod graced us with its presence. However, we would have to wait a while before its potential was fully realized. Birthed into the meta from the Revenge of the Cartels event was the OPQ system, an extremely deadly assault rifle that could combat any challenge. It was much better than any assault rifle we had seen before, but had nothing on its Cartel's counterpart. That was the Yellow Cape, which launched in an incredibly overpowered state. With its unique projectile pattern, this thing could easily one-shot bosses, which is commonplace now, but it wasn't back then. It launched as a more powerful iron cannon which didn't require you to charge it and only consumed 1 or 2 ammo per shot. It really was incredible, and you could even say it was a level above everything else. That everything else included weapons that could only drop on Mayhem 6 or above, which included the Monarch, an assault rifle like the OPQ system, blew all others out of the water. This thing fires an incredible amount of bullets at an incredible speed that would tear everything to shreds. It was the Dictator, but miles better. Also exclusive to the Mayhem 6 club was the Cutsman, an SMG that dealt explosive damage twice, once on impact and then again a short while after. It handled well, felt great, and could be relied upon at all stages of the game. The Sandhawk on the other hand was mainly a bossing weapon, but this thing came with a whole lot of damage. Initially firing 9 projectiles, although they travelled a little slower, this thing would hit like a truck. It originally only consumed 2 ammo per shot, which made it viable on the mobbing field, and it was a prime example of Gearbox bringing a fan favourite weapon back with a bang. That bang became a thud on June 11th, when a sweeping round of nerfs would grace the metasphere. 3 weapons would be hit by nerfs, some harder than others, with 2 of them dropping out of that exclusive club completely. The Sandhawk lost 2 projectiles and its shot cost increased from 2 to 3, but with its bossing capabilities intact, it remained a top tier weapon. The Cutsman, however, wasn't so lucky, receiving a multitude of nerfs. Its accuracy got heavily tainted, along with its critical damage and its base damage. All of these combined to create a weapon that was hard to aim and didn't provide quite enough damage. Unfortunately, many players' favourite weapon from the Mayhem 2.0 update was left to be forgotten about. However, it wasn't hit the hardest, that price going to the Yellow Cake. Similar to the Leuda, the Yellow Cake was bugged and dealt twice as much damage as it was supposed to. They then fixed it, which broke it from our perspective, and left us searching for a launcher that could take its place. Luckily, we didn't have to look far, as the Mayhem 2.0 update brought with it 2 extremely powerful launchers. They included the Backburner, which fires fully automatic orbs that on impact rain down Nerf grenades on your target. The Nerf grenades deal the bulk of its damage, and it's particularly great for bossing, although you can use it for mobbing too. However, it will never mob as well as the Plague Bearer, which is similar to the base game Scourge, but taken to the extreme. When fully charged, it fires a sphere circled by homing rockets, which break out during flight and hunt down nearby targets along the flight path. Those homing rockets are powerful enough to blow up whatever they touch, and another army of them spawns from the main projectile's impact point. Having both of these launches meant you had the best of both worlds, and they would be cemented in the meta from this day forth. The meta was shaken up yet again on the 25th of June thanks to the Bounty of Blood DLC and the increase of the level cap from 57 to 60. That increase in the level cap saw weapons from the Cartel event stuck at level 57 and left them to drop out of contention. However, their loss was more than made up for by the extremely powerful weapons that launched on this day. That included weapons like the Beacon, a gun similar to the Hellshock but always dealt splash damage and more damage at that. The Light Show also joined the cause, a heavy hitting pistol that remains one of the best in the game. This gun is like a more mobile Monarch that'll cut rings in any target. And we also got the Flipper, a weapon with unlisted projectiles that grows in power the longer you hold down the trigger. It would lead us down the path to Maliwan's dominance of the SMG category. The complex route would also launch on this day, but was a bit busy downing you instead of your enemies. It wouldn't be until later on where its true potential would be realized. The Bounty of Blood DLC went a long way into fixing the balance problems introduced by Mayhem 2.0, making up over a third of the meta weapons. No base game item was in sight, but that would soon change. However, there was one base game weapon that could be seen in the meta, but only if you played Amara and ran the Recursion. The Recursion was a phenomenal force of nature in the hands of Amara, thanks to its unique effect which causes ricocheting projectiles to bounce between enemies, dealing damage each time they ricochet. What made it great was the fact that an extra projectile would spawn for each element applied to your shot, and with Amara's ability to add extra elements on top of indiscriminate for bonus ricochets, your game itself would be stunned at the damage you would cause. It worked on other characters too, but Amara did it the best. But on the 23rd of July, that was no more. Gearbox wanted to stabilize their game, and to do so, they reduced the number of times projectiles could bounce, and the number of bonus projectiles that are created when using multiple elements. The rampaging recursion was no more, and on this day they also put a stop to the exploiting of anarchy stacking, which did not bode well for that gun's meta dreams. On the 3rd of September, the Anarchy would slip just outside of the meta, as a base game shotgun received a buff that would catapult it into super stardom. That was the Hellwalker, which grew in power by over 3 times, and became a blazing beast. It's a double-barreled shotgun that shoots flaming rounds, and finally got the damage it needed to match its cool factor. To this day, it remains as one of the most popular weapons in the game, and allows you to cosplay as Doomguy, as the enemies of the Borderlands universe play the part of Hell's demons. A week later, on the 10th of September 2020, we would be graced by the final story DLC, Psycho Krieg's fantastic Fustercluck. The level cap increased to 65, but there were no shifts in the meta. However, a couple of class mods arrived this day, which would have a big impact on its future. November 10th would see another radical change to the meta, almost as big as the Mayhem 2.0 update, and even bigger than the Bounty of Blood, although this time the weapons weren't locked to a DLC, but a game mode. That game mode was of course Arms Race. It released as part of the designer's cut, which also brought us 4 skill trees for all Vault Hunters. Joining the meta and a big part of leading it was the Tizzy, a COV pistol that ignored its overheat cap to fire extremely quickly and drain health bars in seconds. This thing could down a boss in a blink of an eye. It was unlike anything we'd seen before. But Arms Race brought a lot of that, like the Plasma Coil, a gun unique to itself, capable of dishing out high volumes of damage in rapid 16-round bursts. This gun went a long way in making farming Arms Race a necessity. If you thought the flipper was strong, then this thing was something else, only hampered by its burst firing pattern. Alongside these two, in a chest somewhere in Arms Race, was the Kick Charger. Extremely similar to the former solo king of the meta, the Ion Cannon, this thing was that concept taken to the extreme. Like the original Ion Cannon, it only consumes 1 ammo per shot, its shots pierce targets, and you can shortcut its charge mechanic simply by sliding. These weapons confirmed that the game was getting easier, the challenge was fading, and 4 skill trees were helping with that. The introduction of the 4 skill trees opened the door for the route to cement itself within the meta. Zane's Eraser skill, coupled with the recently released Hustler class mod, gave this weapon Amara plus Recursion vibes, but for Zane. It's capable of doing things other guns can't, and Zane's duct tape mod skill prevents it from harming him. By this point, its capabilities simply can't be ignored. A little into the new year, on the 11th of February 2021, an unlikely weapon became a top 3 World Eater. That gun was the Crit, which had its damage increased by 540%, and coupled with its crit damage bonus in tandem with lifesteal, made this one of the most overpowered weapons in the game. Regardless of who you play as, this gun does work. It simply struggles not to, that is, if you're hitting crits. If you think back to 2019 with the Cutsman holding the meta for Melee and compare that to now where you've got the crit, plasma coil and flipper, it's safe to say that things have changed drastically. There was one gun though that hadn't changed and continued to grow stronger with every DLC's release. That was the Face Puncher, a shotgun that dealt melee damage instead of gun damage. It was at this point in the game's life cycle where this thing was at its earth-shattering best. Aided of course by the White Elephant artifact, Amara, and her Muse class mod released as part of the Psycho Krieg DLC, which at the time could drop with 3 points in Illuminated Fist. Because the Face Puncher harnesses the power of Chuck Norris, it played by a completely different set of rules, and is responsible for the most powerful build the game has ever seen. Unfortunately, it didn't stay that way, with the White Elephant getting nerfed on the 11th of March 2021, with its damage being reduced by 75%. That wasn't the end of it though, as on the 1st of April the Face Puncher itself was nerfed, having its damage reduced by 40%. They picked on it because it was different, but Gearbox had another trick up their sleeves. All good magicians save their best for last, and that's exactly what Borderlands 3 did when on the 8th of April 2021 the Director's Cut launched, bringing with it the most broken gear in the game. Melee did it again with the creation of the Free Radical, a pistol that is essentially the third coming of the Hellshock. This thing only comes in shock and deals splash damage, but enormous amounts of it at that. Putting it plainly, this thing is ridiculously strong. However, it's still contested by some of the other broken gear in the game, unlike the Guardian Angel, which launched as part of the Fallen Heroes Vault card on the same day. This gun is essentially you holding a sign that says "more damage please," and the game gives it to you, increasing all of your damage sources by up to 400% the further away you are from the thing getting hurt. It paved the way to some ridiculous builds and some ridiculous amounts of damage, made especially apparent with Flak and his Peregrine class mod. In that setup, Flak's rack and your grenades are boosted to heights you'd never think possible, and it became a must-have item for the enormous boost in damage it provides. Throughout this video, the meta shifts mostly revolved around weapons, but on this day shields would change forever. Although the old god was considered the best, it certainly wasn't miles better than the survivability focused or unique shields available in the game. Gearbox decided to forget about all that though and introduced the Revolter and Infernal Wish, two shields that massively boosted your damage. It wasn't 20% like the old god. The Revolter grants you 200% bonus shock damage and a 50% increase in fire rate whenever it's depleted. And the Infernal Wish has you firing 2 for 1 as long as there's some charge in it, essentially doubling your damage. When you put these two shields on the table and offer up some from earlier on in the game's lifecycle, you're never going to pick the older shields. It's quite sad how the shield meta had to end like that, but the overall meta wasn't done with yet. On the 24th of June, we saw the return of the Revenge of the Cartels event, along with all the others, as well as an increase in the level cap to 72. The OPQ system was back, but not as shiny as it once appeared. However, something did look a lot juicier, and that was the Fish Slap, the Face Puncher's grenade mod buddy. Like the Face Puncher, the Fish Slap deals melee damage, which allows for some crazy interactions. And 15 levels older, this fish had grown into a monster. Amara's 4th skill tree, buffs to the Psycho Stabber and the release of the Guardian Angel alongside Flak's Peregrine class mod made this the go-to grenade for dealing damage. And it wasn't just a little bit of damage, this was the little fish that could, able to one-shot bosses easier than many weapons. I don't know if it was its raw power or simply its smell, but the Fish Slap relaunched as a grenade mod you just couldn't ignore. From this point onwards, the only real challenges to the meta came in the form of the Roll and Calls buff and the introduction of the Blade Fury, with the Blade Fury picking up where the Face Puncher left off. Let me know in the comments what your favourite version of the meta was, and whether you would return to that point in time if you could.